Kakio. Hi, my name is Danis Goulet and I'm the writer and director of Night Raiders. Thank you for your interest in this co-production panel. Night Raiders is a co-production between Canada and New Zealand, and we were the first international Indigenous co-production between the two countries. Our team first did this panel back in October 2020 for the imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival, but I'm here to give an update on the film to let you know what's happened since then. So towards the end of the film, or towards the end of 2020, we finished the film in conjunction with New Zealand, and we continue to work through the pandemic remotely. And it was great because our composers, our VFX team, and also our sound designers were all based in New Zealand, and so they were able to completely keep going, and I just communicated remotely with them, and then we were able to bring all of the sound together and mix it here in studio in Toronto. So we finished the film, and then we learned that the film was selected for the panorama section of the 2021 Berlinale. So our team is absolutely thrilled that we're going to be in Berlin, and totally honored, and we're really excited by this launch. Berlin is happening in a slightly different form this year, but we are still launching at the EFM in the first week of March. So we'll be taking the film out to press and industry along with our sales agents, XYZ Films. So we're very excited for that. And then I think what we want to do for the latter part of 2021 is bring the film home to North America and then to its second home, New Zealand. And we really want the film to be seen in theaters with people. And so we're really hoping that's going to happen. And so our fingers are crossed that we can bring it home and take it elsewhere, but hopefully have that in theater experience. So I'm hoping that for my film and for everybody else's film too. So thanks again for your interest in the panel, and enjoy the festival.
Karanga mai e te tipua, karanga mai e te tawhito. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga o rātou kua riro ki te pō, haere, haere, haere atura. Karanga mai ki ngai wi take o te ao, ki tēnei huinga tangata, ki tēnei huinga rangatira. Karanga mai. Karanga mai e koro, hei kanohi, hei reo ata whai, hei pau matua mo tō iwi. Me whakanuia koutou katoa, ka tika. Tukutuku te rangaranga wheti wao, no te hautapu ngā rēhua, whakahekea hei tātai ki te umae, whakakōpani ake ki te hiringa matua, hei mauri whakaohoi a tātou, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. We draw in the vast presence of our beings and ancestors and acknowledge them here. We draw in the Indigenous people to this chiefly gathering. We honour our elder Keith as the face, the voice, the pillar of his tribe, and we rightfully celebrate this gathering, weaving the constellation of the stars into our sacred being, bringing them into your heart, enabling our ancient energies, steadfast together, enriched, unified, blessed. Firstly, thank you, Elder Keith Goulet, for providing the protocol for today as our hosts and the acknowledgement and response from us as Māori from Aotearoa. It's important in providing the foundation of this panel, and indeed the way that this project differs from any film partnership. imagineNATIVE and the New Zealand Film Commission acknowledge the Indigenous ancestors, land and language of Canada and Aotearoa, New Zealand. We welcome you all to this event, Night Raiders and Indigenous Collaboration. Ko Te O Kahurangi tōku ingo. My name is Te O Kahurangi, Karen Waka Tibble, and I'm the Pouwhakahaere of the New Zealand Film Commission. I'm a Māori Screen Executive, and my role is to lead the Māori strategy for the Commission, ensuring support, funds, and greater considerations for Māori stories and filmmakers. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel today. I'd like to also welcome our writer, director, and producer from Canada, Danis Goulet, and her father, Keith. Tēnā kōrua, Danis. Also our producers from Aotearoa, New Zealand, no te whānau apanui, Ngāti Pikiao, Ngāti Awa, Ainsley Gardiner. e no Ngāti Rangi Nui, Chelsea Winstanley. Tēnā koutou katoa. The film is around the year 2043. A military occupation controls disenfranchised cities in post-war North America. Children are property of the state, and a desperate Cree woman joins an underground band of vigilantes to infiltrate a state children's academy and get her daughter back. We're going to just have a look at the trailer that's part of imagineNATIVE this year. That looks awesome. Firstly, I'd like to invite Danis just to introduce the film from your perspective and give us an insight into your journey. Tēnā koe hoa.
Dansei, Danis Goulet, Nisigason, Saskatchewan, Ochinia, Maganawegan, Toronto. I'm Danis Goulet, Cree Métis from Northern Saskatchewan. I'm here in Toronto, and I just want to first start by thanking imagineNATIVE for having us all here. Night Raiders, as was already said, is set in a near future. It imagines children are property of the state, and it follows a woman trying to get her daughter back in a post-Civil War North America. So I started writing it, I think, around 2013. So it's been, you know, a journey of at first just long writing and development, and then we finally shot last year towards the end of 2019, and we're just nearing the very end of our post process. So it's been a long journey, but really incredible. And, you know, we ended up being the first international Indigenous co-production between Canada and New Zealand. So that was also something to really celebrate. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey with everyone.
Hahandu tevitik niwagu magantik. Mistay magami na tagaganitagan. E mama iki chansin ni no my imagineNATIVE Film Festival kay Chigatek 2020. Umaga usita chikuge utatuskeni o tsagate panichiga. Tapigo tapskuche tsagastena e isigaisi machi iswa. Isigaisi eyamia. Isigay wan kapesi Danis tutama. Umokta no tayo ka pigiskot tayo ma pega yo tsaka te panichiga na gusi tsaka te piskai the panichiga wa kisiniga teo Night Raiders. Mistay te gino pa tsaka te tansi simes tsaka te kagi si pesi gino pa tamagi taski no kitinim na ok minayo awasak. Mistay ko es chiganita ga gino pa mai go kamamahi chikmana. Ego si semana goes eti tasta chik papi tuskegan eni paistamasu chigo es minayo ego si se eni ganistagik. Goes mina mitrego si se mamahi chik. Ego si goes siginop atay isigai si machi iswa. Ego naman mitrego es ninanasko ben. How? Matin do tabageta. Friends and relations. It is again a good feeling to get together at the imagineNATIVE Film Festival. We get together to deal with the issue of filmmaking, which in Cree we call shining a light. Together as filmmakers, you are here together to shine a light on our cultures, our languages, and our histories. In this particular instance, we are dealing with a film called Night Raiders, incidentally by my daughter, Danis, and the people from not only within Canada, but also from New Zealand. These are exciting times. We are looking at the tremendous challenges of the past, reconfiguring it to make sure that when our people are here now, they know our history, but also they are standing up together. They are creating leadership together, and they are working together on the many aspects of the development of film. I am very proud as an Indigenous person And what I can say on behalf of everyone is, pues, kinanas commit na. However,
Danis, I just wanted to ask, I guess, in bringing this production together, it's been your genesis, it's come from your heart and soul. And how did you know when your script was ready to then go into production, given the journey you've been on?
Yeah, I think I worked really closely for a number of years with Tara Woodbury, who's one of the producers up here, and she was really there for the development journey. And I think, you know, her and I just kept our heads down until we got to a certain point. We could just always feel, I think, in your gut, you know, that you still have things to work out. And then, you know, and that process goes all the way up into production. But at the same time, sometimes there are just things that you feel are not quite, you kind of know that they need to be worked out. And at a certain point, we just felt like all across the board, the pieces of the script were solid at the year that we decided to start seeking financing. And I also want to acknowledge Briar Grace Smith because, you know, she read the script at one of its very earliest incarnations. I mean, she might have been one of the first pairs of eyes on it. And, you know, very early on, I had imagined what if there was a Maori character in the film, and what would that be and what would it look like. So I sent it to her really early because I had a bunch of concerns about that. And it was just really amazing to get her feedback, both as, you know, an incredible Maori woman, and to have that perspective, but also because she's such an incredible screenwriter. And so that sort of was something that I addressed very early on. But I mean, I think for me, writing took a long time, and I would take time away from it and then come back to it. And then in 2017, we really started actively looking for financing. So another producer from Canada, Paul Barkin, came on board, and he had experience with international co-production before, which I think is valuable because it adds an extra layer of complexity to if you're just financing a national project here in Canada. It's really different than taking it up to that next level. And it was something that we'd all not engaged in. And I think that year also, I was with Chelsea, and we were both advisors on a native lab, and she read the script back then and gave me feedback. And we talked to Ainsley that year as well. And then it really started to come together. And we in earnest tried to make the financing work between Telefilm and the New Zealand Film Commission.
How easy or difficult was that? Because you've made it sound really easy. And I'm aware that just getting a film from development, from that script process, can take quite a long time. And then you've brought in a number of partners within Canada. You've mentioned how you've come together with Ainsley and Chelsea and Briar's involvement. But how easy was that for you?
Well, I think, you know, for Indigenous projects, because we have such a shared history, that there's such a connection. And, you know, imagineNATIVE has played such an important role in that. Like the festival's been so central to fostering these kinds of relationships. And I think that co-production from the industry perspective is thought of as a business partnership that we all enter into. And I think a lot of people think, you know, where do you find these business partners? But I think because our global Indigenous community meets up all over the world through imagineNATIVE and also on the festival circuit, and because we have that shared history, I think we connect on many different levels that go beyond, you know, a business partnership. And I can certainly say that, you know, when I brought the script, you know, I met Ainsley on the festival circuit at imagineNATIVE, same with Chelsea. We had been, you know, meeting each other and sharing connections for years. And so I think just building off of that, you know, we understand each other's stories, and there was just a real generosity on their part to really want to support me and this project, and also the idea of this international collaboration between us. And that support wasn't just in terms of making the financing come together. I really felt the presence of, you know, these incredible women really supporting, you know, what this project was trying to be, because it was big, it was ambitious, it is the highest budget Indigenous helmed, an Indigenous director at the helm. It was the highest budget that had ever been seen in Canada before. And so we had a lot of pressure on us, and it was big, you know, it was a big undertaking. And I felt like, you know, the support coming, especially from, you know, Indigenous sisters, was really felt on set, but also just throughout the whole process. And that kind of like psychological support or spiritual support, or whatever you want to frame it as, just gave me so much strength through the process. And that was one of the things that was really beautiful to me about what this became. And then the business stuff, you know, as maybe Ainsley and Chelsea can speak to what it was like to try to bring those financing pieces together, because we had to line up things between Telefilm and the New Zealand Film Commission. But for me, it was kind of a dream come true to have this all come together in the way that it did.
I just wanted to tautoko that and say that actually, first and foremost, there were the relationships which we've all been building for many, many years at festivals like imagineNATIVE and Sundance and other places where, as Danis has said, we discovered very early on that not only were we sharing human experiences as storytellers, but we were sharing kind of deeper, resonant experiences as Indigenous people, and that whilst we all had our own kind of cultural specificity, there was this really strong, talented, global Indigenous movement of storytellers. And we recognised really early that the success of one was a success for all of us. So we've been sort of cheerleaders for one another for many years. And so what Night Raiders gave us the opportunity to do was to actually develop that into something more significant and meaningful in terms of that. In terms of being able to develop a culture of global Indigenous filmmaking even more tangibly, to the credit of Telefilm and New Zealand Film Commission, they did recognise that one of the most important aspects of this film was the fact that it was an Indigenous co-production, and that they were both motivated to make that work. So while the piecing together of any financing puzzle is really difficult, it was something that everybody was incredibly motivated to make happen. So it was simply a matter of going through a process. But because both of our funding bodies were excited about that possibility as much as we were, and they recognised the value of an Indigenous co-production, they worked hard to make it happen too.
So as a producer, Ainsley, and you two, Chels, on this production, what was involved in terms of working between the two countries and working with Danis and the team?
Well, I guess, yes, it did start relatively early on in terms of the script development, but as Danis has said, a lot of that had already taken place when we came on board. So we, in many ways, it was really functional. We had to satisfy the requirements of the co-production treaty and our own various tax credit kind of things, really boring, basic business stuff that we had to put in place. And I suppose just continuing that developed relationship of being there for each other and supporting each other. I think one of the key components for us on our side was our Māori contingent that went over, of which Chelsea was one. So Chelsea, do you want to speak to that in terms of having your presence and our presence there?
Kia ora tātou. Kia tau te rangi Māori, kia tātou. Yeah, just going back also on what you're talking about relationship-wise, it's fitting, Danis, I can see you're wearing Meredith's name proudly on your chest, and we can all, this relationship community that we have has so much to do with her and so much to do with Alanese and the beautiful connections that we have with our communities, this Indigenous community, really is because of these strong, incredible women. And it's so wonderful that here we all are on this panel, Papa Keith, honorary wā, with us, but here we all are continuing that legacy of support, acknowledgement, tautoko for our sisters worldwide on a global scale to keep forging, being part of that movement of making sure our voices are heard. And it's a wonderful thing to do collectively, because that is just something that's intrinsically quite different, I think, from Western to Indigenous communities, is literally that, community versus individuality. And we're all part of this community, and it's just wonderful that we can create something financially works together, and it's a community type of situation that really hasn't been done before, and it's a really good platform for us to go, it's been done, we can do it again. Collectively, we can actually be making these amazing films. So it was, for me personally, to be able to come on board, it was such a treat in so many ways, because I got to participate in another Indigenous community's way of working. We got to participate in their language, in their culture. Wow, like that in and of itself is amazing. We got to see how Danis and her whānau and her community of Indigenous filmmakers wanted to begin a production, and it was also kind of shared experiences. You could see, oh wow, yeah, we do have a language in the way in which we work, and we like to start off our practices the same way that they do too. So it's this really, it's just a knowing we can do this together. I just feel so hopeful about the future, that we can do more and more of this, and this has just set an incredible precedent. So yeah, thankful to Telefilm and to NZFC for having the guts to kind of do it. They actually had to go outside their normal, I guess, policy in a way and stretch it a bit, but this is what happens. This, when you take a leap of faith and you back someone as incredible as Danis to do what she wanted to do, proof is in the pudding. Bring on that purity.
Thanks, Chas.
I don't think I answered that question, whatever that question was about.
No,
Best time ever.
Chelsea, Kath Aku Hata-Brown and Kurupai Rikihana were our Māori contingent. So Chelsea was there as a producer, Kath Aku Hata-Brown was there as a director attachment, although she was also kind of able to support Danis in a almost as a additional Māori advisor. We had Ngā Paki Moitara here in New Zealand, who was our language and culture advisor, and Kurupai was on the costume team. So it was, again, one of the significant factors of the NZFC's involvement was to have wahine Māori women on the ground and sharing in the experience, which obviously I didn't get to do, and I feel very jealous about that.
We missed you, Ainsley, but you were a little bit busy producing and directing your own movie. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because, we're still at the point, I think, where we're trying to develop more Indigenous crew up in Canada, and the Indigenous Screen Office has identified that as a need and something that needs to be worked towards. And so, we did a mentorship program to get Indigenous people on our set, but, even to have that contingent of people come over, it just really makes a difference to have Indigenous people on set, it really does. And I just want to acknowledge Kath's role, especially because she was just so grounding, and she did some really essential work with one of the actors, Alex Tarrant, who was playing the role of Leo. And when we went into rehearsals, there were things that I don't want to give any spoilers away in the film, but there were things that were really related to his identity and really deep within the character, that had to do with things that have to do with cultural knowledge. And so I went into rehearsals with two of the other actors, and Kath actually took an individual rehearsal with Alex, and she talked him through his most important scene in the film. And I just feel like she gave us and gave me something that I wouldn't have been able to give to him. And that, you know, just the depth of that scene and the way he performed it was coming from such a deep place, and it was so beautiful. And it was really Kath that was, you know, the guiding hand through that process. And I just felt so grateful to have her there. You know, she was essentially, you know, working as an additional director, helping him through the performance of that scene, from even down to, you know, finding the words that he was going to say, because it was in the language. And again, that's something that I couldn't help with. And we had cultural advisors from the Maori side as well. But, you know, like Kath was really that presence on set, and it was really, really important to what she did.
So bringing on a number of the people, and Ainsley and Charles have all mentioned the New Zealand contingent. Who else from your side, Danis, in the Canadian and the native, you know, your native Métis and Cree people, how did that work in terms of mentorship and other support that you got from Telefilm?
Yeah, so the mentorship program was actually supported through the Indigenous Screen Office. And then I think Ontario Creates also contributed to that. But ISO actually has a specific program for it, and it enabled us to bring on young Indigenous mentees in the grip department, the wardrobe department, in the office. And, you know, again, that presence was incredible, but also that we were able to offer that mentorship opportunity to them was great. And so the program, I think, is continuing. Another thing that we did is, well, we also had our Cree advisors there. My dad flew out and was in parts of the scene, but we also very much relied on Pauline Shirt, who's a Cree elder. And where we were shooting, I should say, is not traditional Cree territory. So when we started shooting, we had to have a welcome to the territory that was hosted by an Anishinaabe elder, because we were not on the territory of the story that the film was about. So it just added another layer. But you know, the Cree folks that I come from are all out west, you know, very far away from where we were shooting. So my dad flew out for production. There was another advisor, Ray Thunderchild, who plays the role of Tiny in the film. He helped us with, there's a camp in the film that required like a teepee setup where there's protocols around that. So he helped with that, plus some of the local folks that we sourced everything from helped us with setup. But Pauline Shirt also is Cree, originally from Saddle Lake First Nation in Alberta. So that, again, is closer to my home territory. But she's worked here as an elder for many, many years in the community of Toronto, and actually as imagineNATIVE's elder. So her presence was really incredible. And then I also, the way my dad was involved and has always been involved in all of my projects is that I start with him when I'm in development. So I'll just sit down at the kitchen table and we'll just start talking about conceptual things. So because I'm not a language speaker and he is, and it's his first language, so he brings the thought to the process where we'll talk about a concept in Cree and what it means and what the perspective is and how that's different. And then I try to bring that thinking, that conceptual thinking, into the writing or into different ideas that I'm playing with in the screenplay. So there's certain ideas about Cree perspectives on animate and inanimate that play out really importantly in the story. That's really a key thread. And also the concept of Oganawajigu, which means a keeper or a guardian, and that's something, somebody who's tasked with looking after others, and also is a really key idea in the film. So yeah, it was really amazing that my dad could come out for production after being involved in the script for so long. But yeah, I mean, I call my dad for all kinds of things, translation, he looks at syllabics, he does, like, up until this morning, I was calling him and asking him to do some kind of translation about the concept of the Cree perspective on animate and inanimate. So yeah, lots of different avenues in which we involve, but I continue to want to see more development of crew because again, that presence is just so important.
So given the experience that particularly the three of you have had as producers and Danis as a writer-director, what can you speak to the aspirations that you had initially and then what the reality is, given that it's going to be part of imagineNATIVE, and then I guess the next step in terms of you've done it once and as Charles was saying, we can now do it again. Can you each speak to, I guess, those notions of the aspiration, the reality, and I guess the future potential as filmmakers and writers and producers?
I'll jump in just because I wanted to dovetail off something that Danis was saying, and I think that one of the things that I think is really difficult is to populate our crews with Indigenous practitioners, and the argument is always that there isn't the availability or the skill base, and I think one of the things that Telefilm and the New Zealand Film Commission need to recognise is that is a result of institutionalised racism, and actually it's not even true for the most part. But in order for us to have the option to choose between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, what can we do? I know that when Merita made Modi, it has to be a political choice. It has to be a cultural survival choice to populate your films with Indigenous people. And she did so in Modi. To an extent, you would say she compromised the vision of the film in order to have emerging actors, untrained crew, and it shouldn't have to be that way. So I guess one of the things that one of my aspirations in terms of that is that if I just had an idea while Danis was talking, so I'm just going to float it right now. Yep. If our film commissions could make a number of films every year or one a year that the intention of which was to upskill Indigenous crew, that was still resourced properly and supported properly, and the writer-director was still able to make the film that they wanted, but that we could have a longer period of time where an emerging DOP could work alongside and not under an established DOP, taking the time they need to get those people upskilled, then I think that would be one way of doing it. But for the time being, as producers, I just think the unfortunate situation is that it has to be a political choice. We have to choose somebody who doesn't have as much experience as somebody who does, simply because we need to we need to value their cultural identity as one of the skills and experiences that they bring to the table. And so, yeah, I feel like it needs proper resourcing, because otherwise, in the meantime, we have to do something that feels somewhat compromised in order to allow for the development of that skill base. But the aspiration would be that we have a wide choice of people. And I'm not sure what you think, Charles, but actually in New Zealand, I think we're probably better off than, Danis, you are in Canada in many ways, because you could just about populate a film with all Māori HODs and have a choice of a handful. Do you think, Charles?
Yeah, you probably could. I mean, at the moment, what did I see? Someone written down, there's like 7 international productions coming to Aotearoa, and it's just like scooping everyone up. Bam! And they're all going to get like massive paychecks. And so you're kind of, if you're trying to make something smaller on an indie level, you're then kind of faced with that issue too, eh? Like, lots of skilled people are already being snapped up, which is good on one hand. Yes, it gives people jobs and enables people to work. On the other hand, then it's like skill shortage. so it doesn't just become a political choice at that matter. It's like, holy shit, I got no other options. But I just wanted to pick up on something you just said too, Ains, about valuing cultural identity as something that we haven't done and we don't do, and we tend to kind of make so many things out of, it's almost like community service projects, because we know we have to do it and we know we need to do it, and we do it often at the expense of our health and well-being too, because it can be so taxing, to have to wear that hat as well as trying to build capacity and trying to make the best product you possibly can. And I want to acknowledge Eva Thomas, who was on the Canadian side in the producing part of the team, who we worked alongside by. And, you know, she was charged with a lot of having to do that cultural aspect side of stuff, which sometimes took her away from probably learning about real intense skills of the producing and the co-production financing stuff. And I felt a bit of aroha for her at some stages, actually, because it was almost like an easy pass. And of course, as an Indigenous woman on that project, she's not going to say no to making sure cultural integrity was taken care of, and people like whakawhanaungatanga, manaakitanga, like that stuff is so important. It's like an unwritten kind of language that we kind of share, but you have to start from that base, you know. So yeah, I think that is the problem too. Sometimes we just, you'll tick all those kind of cool cultural boxes, and therefore we'll put you over there. So I think we have to make sure, like you were talking, Ains, having a lot longer lead-in time. So if it's a DOP or a producer coming up, that they are sitting beside and at the table from the beginning, understanding what co-production finance actually looks like, being privy and open to all that knowledge. It's so important. You can't just give someone a title and just be that'll do, that's enough. Like, you've got to share the knowledge as well. But it was wonderful to see her in her capacity and work like that, and just those beautiful, lovely cultural things that we share, like manaakitanga. It was just, wonderful to see. But Aspirations, you know, I'm working with a Hawaiian filmmaker right now, and we're in post-production, and this could be another Indigenous co-production. Like, I'm coming at you, NZFC. But what I mean is that we should be doing this because we can, and Danis, you've just proved it, you know, what you and Ains were able to do and pull together from both funding agencies. It doesn't mean we can't do it again now. Like, hurrah to the wahine warriors of the world, because I feel like we're also, honestly, we get charged with having to do these things because, no one else is, so, you know, and we just prove it time and time again. So valuing all those things that we bring to the table, it feels like there really is a movement of change happening, because you can't go backwards from this, you know. Set the standard. Thanks, Danis.
Thanks to you guys. A few years ago, maybe it was 5 years ago now, I was involved in working on a report that was about Indigenous feature film in Canada, and we actually looked to Australia and New Zealand and different funding bodies and different initiatives around the world, because at that time there was very, very little feature film production being funded where Indigenous folks were in key creative roles as directors, producers, and writers. And at that time, we said, like, basically show us the money, because we can do this, we can do it, you know, and it was already being proven that we could do it. But I think sometimes, you know, the idea that we can't do it, it is a part of systemic racism, like that lack of belief that we can do it, or even the lack of belief that our stories will have a place in the marketplace, you know. And you know, that report was kind of heartbreaking to work on, because I had to do numerous interviews with so many producers and writers and directors who had been through the process, and what they had to do to get their films made was heartbreaking. Like, I had people telling me stories of their experience of either racism in the industry, or, you know, even just on a very basic level, the lack of trust that can exist. You know, when you're looking for a partner, it's like, will this partner understand what this story means? You know, like, I am not just putting product out into, you know, like, you know, it's like the ideas of capitalism and different values like are really clashing with our desire to tell our stories and what they mean to us. And in that context, it's really hard. You know, you're asking yourselves, are these people going to get it? And what I tried to do from the very beginning was think of our project as being values driven. And so what I would try to explain to different partners is, you know, this, you know, comes from certain values. It comes from Indigenous values, and this is what it means. And it means that sometimes when we're making decisions, it's going to clash with what might be wrong from a business perspective, and that we're going to have to embrace that process and talk about it. But the thing about collaborating with other Indigenous people is often there's already a ground where we get what that means. And so I feel like often I'm explaining to like non-Indigenous partners, you know, like all this whole like values speech that you have to go through every time. But I think, you know, for the funders, you know, they've really needed, and what we said to them when we worked on that report is, you know, like, nobody here believes that you actually value our stories. Like, you need to start naming us. You need to start signaling loud and clear that not only are we welcome at your doorstep, but that you will embrace and support us. And I feel like, you know, years of advocacy went into, you know, this project actually getting the level of support that it did. And kudos to, you know, Telefilm and to New Zealand Film Commission and to Ontario Creates for really taking that leap of faith, you know, because we were saying that it is important to have Indigenous people at the helm of our own stories. And it is important to have Indigenous crew, but you need to signal to the community. And I think now there's a lot of crew initiatives happening, and that's a really important step because, you know, the funders and the existing infrastructure has to signal, we value your community, come in the door, we will support you. And also that our lived experience as Indigenous people has traditionally been undervalued. So, you know, like what the work that Eva Thomas was doing as an associate producer was some really heavy lifting. You know, she was really holding a lot of the cultural pieces, liaising with the elders. And to me, that job is producing when you're on an Indigenous production. And it is just as valuable as, you know, like going through the budget line by line, you know, like both of those things can be held up as important. And I think when we're in a system that always doesn't even see that that's of value, you know, and one day we were shooting a really difficult scene, and I was having a hard time with it. One of the actors was having a hard time with it. And I just took a deep breath and I said, you know what, we need to pause. Do you need a smudge? And the actor said, yes. And I said, I do too. So, you know, we ground like a major production to a halt until we could find a smudge. And, you know, that day on set, Lee George, who was one of the mentees that was a production assistant who like was so much of a heart of being on set. He was so wonderful and everyone loved him. But we said, like, where's the smudge and who has the smudge? And Lee said, oh, you know, my son thought that we would need a smudge, and so he put it in the trunk of my car, and I'll just run and get it. And it was something that we really needed in that moment. And if Lee hadn't have been there, like, where would that support have come from? Because what I always say to people as well that are on the outside, you know, like what the actors are bringing is their own personal lived experience, and we're trying to protect everybody in the process, and on some level fiction protects us, you know, the fact that we're portraying characters protects us, but the actors are drawing on their own and sometimes their own trauma, you know, to bring a performance to life. And so, you know, as a director, I thought that my role was just to fiercely protect that, but then sometimes we need cultural support. And so, you know, like that presence on set was really important that day. And that scene, when you watch it, is like one of the linchpins in the movie, you know, it's like really important. And so, you know, like how can you communicate what that means, you know, to when you're that it means everything. It's so important that we do it this way.
I think that's one of the aspirations for our funders as well, is that, you know, Indigenous culture, Indigenous cultural infrastructure is very robust and developed over centuries, far many more years than any bureaucratic structure that we're trying to deal with. And it's backwards that the onus of proof is on us to prove that the way we work is efficient and correct. And so I actually, it's amazing that you were able to fold those things in, Danis, and it's unfortunate that we have to fold anything in and that it's not the other way around, that actually the Hollywood model that we all operate on is just over 100 years old, and it's a male, patriarchal, egotistical way of working. And we work, as Chelsea's already said, community based, collaboratively, and to argue even that having inexperienced people in the right environment can turn out just as good a film as having all experienced crew. We shouldn't need to argue that, because we are then supporting them with all of our cultural values, as you've discussed, Danis. And so I suppose the aspiration, again, as well as being properly resourced to develop crews, Indigenous crews, through the whole process of making a film, was that we're able to make films in a structure that makes sense to us, and in a way that makes sense to our stories. And be entrusted to do that simply because we're already better at it. We've already been doing it for way more years than anybody else. We've been being Indigenous for far more years than anybody else has been making films. So, we're a higher level of expertise than just filmmakers. So that would be another aspiration for us in our funding bodies.
That's amazing. I love that. And I would say too that, the reality, the aspiration versus the reality is that we still are contained within a hierarchical structure on set, and that comes with its own cultural values. Like, there's a very strong set culture that is very set in its ways, and you could feel, people were bringing years of expertise, but also like baggage about the way that sets run. And that caused conflict, and it wasn't, and at times you really have to maneuver through that, and also that there are cross-cultural misunderstandings sometimes, and you have to navigate through that, and sometimes it can be tricky and uncomfortable. But part of, and what we did do the day before shooting is we did like a training, like a few hours of training that was a cultural awareness course that was mandatory for all of the crew. So we had this wonderful trainer come in, and he talked about, basically gave like the colonization 101, like based in Canada, to the entire crew. But what it did was it actually tied in so much of the historical policies that I was drawing on to create the story, and tying it to the story that we were like. I think it actually, a lot of light bulbs went off in the room that day, because people were going, oh my God, the Indian Act is what? And that's really similar to what happens in the story. And I think all of a sudden the crew were all making these connections that they wouldn't have made. And I think it grounded everyone in kind of like, I hope at least that people felt united in some kind of purpose in the story that we were telling. But set culture still is what it is. And I would say that aspirationally, I would love to have so many more Indigenous people on set, so that, there are ways in which we can continue to change and challenge set culture.
I'm aware that we've got a few people that will be wanting to ask questions after this, and I just wanted to throw to each of you, knowing that there's a number of aspiring filmmakers in the audience, and so much of what you've shared already has given insight, including to the funders, and how we can better improve going forward. But what would be your messages to some of the aspiring filmmakers watching this now, either as a writer or a director or producer? What would be a key message? Charles, to you? Gosh,
key message. Just lead with intention. Always make sure your intention is true to your heart and to you. And if you're working from an Indigenous perspective, then make sure your intention is true to your people. And I think this project proves that. in so many ways. Danis just mentioned that cultural training day. That was pivotal. I could see the room, literally people's faces changing, having those moments of, wow, allowing them to actually be a part of the whole process and project as well. Because I think sometimes we kind of compartmentalize and we don't allow our bigger, wider crew to be part of it. So it was a beautiful way to start. Everyone felt like they were then part of this bigger, wider whānau storytelling. But gosh, you know, I just feel it. I feel it in my bones that this is just the beginning of something that is going to be intrinsically part of our global movement of Indigenous storytellers, that we really can come together and create that change. Maybe we can create that change of set culture and make it more community driven. Maybe we can change the whole culture of financing and funding, because it's still very hierarchical and it's still very policy driven. Maybe we can have more of a community commitment to that as well. But I just think let's keep moving. We're moving in the right direction. There's no reason why we need to stop. Mauri ora.
Ains?
I would say one of the biggest things that I would say is about relationship. It isn't a soloist endeavor. It is truly about collaboration, and the sooner you can start to find people with shared experiences and shared values and shared goals to work with, the better. And I often find that new filmmakers come to me as an experienced producer wanting me to work with them, and I'm forever saying, no, go and work with an emerging producer. You've got so much more to learn together as a team if you work together with your peers and develop together. And so that's the first part of it. And the second part of it, which is just feels like such a trite piece of advice, but in this day and age of technology, once you find a group of kin to make things with, then you need to start making things, even if they are just documentaries on your iPhones or short films that you make over the course of a week. Because that thing about skill and experience is that so much of it happens just by doing, and the outcome does not need to be a film that is seen by the world. The outcome should be, how do I become a better storyteller? That would be the basic advice that I would offer an aspiring filmmaker.
You're Ainsley. Danis?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Ainsley's saying about, you know, not being afraid to kind of experiment and not know whether or not it will work. You know, I shot a lot of short films in building up to this process, and I tried something different every single time. Sometimes I would work with first-time performers from my community. Sometimes I would go out on the land. One time I actually took my dad and my cousin out on the land and made a scripted drama with them, even though no one had acted before. And so I treated every single one of those projects like an experiment. And it also takes the pressure off, because, you know, we're not just holding all of the pressure that a normal filmmaker would hold. We're also, you know, up against 100 years of misrepresentation of our stories on screen. And so I think as Indigenous creators, we have, you know, we want to get it right. You know, we want to do the right thing, and we still want to have complex stories and characters up on screen, but it's a lot of weight of history to contend with when we're trying to counter such negative narratives that have always existed about us. You know, sometimes it feels so urgent. And I would say, you know, again, we're so used to being kind of like the other or the odd person out, but never underestimate, you know, what you as an Indigenous creative bring to this process. You know, like us as a community, we get it, and we will say it's valuable. Your lived experience is valuable. Your stories are valuable. And so just trust that and go with it and continue to learn along the way. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You know, we're just all here to support each other.
Nā reira I runga I tērā ka huri mātou I tēnei wā, me whakakapi tēnei wahanga. So we're just going to close off this this part of our interviews and open it up for questions shortly. But I runga I tēnā mai whakahoki te rākau kōrero ki a koe e te pau Keith. Me te mihi nui ki au koutou katoa, I runga I te tika te pono me te rangi Māori e o a tātou nei mahi. So thank you all for including us and sharing all of, I didn't have to do a thing, I just listened to all of you, my akutua kana, and listening to the wonderful experience. Looking forward to watching Night Raiders, part of imagineNATIVE. Kei a koe, we pass the rākau back to Keith to close our session.
Mr. West, tagagani tagaran do tamagian. Ego sisu papitus kai siya tusket. Uta e mama I chega sita chigo mataga Stephanie chigan Night Raiders kai chega te. Maga taginopa tama agama skigo chian sinji gaya chip. Umagawi katus kiagu ta Canada. Ego sisi. New Zealand o chia wita tuskemago an sinni. Endo pogiteo chia ni país tamasut. Pogiteo chia go sisi kaya te ege patago negaya. Pues ege ni país tamaswa ke go sisi. Mr. Mino asinuma kai sia pinege choge. Mitsai gisi kai si tapo gani tamake gon. Mr. Egon ma koes dinanasko Mr. I guess it is a great thanks as I closed off, you know, my listening in to the conversation tonight. As I looked at the situation of filmmakers working together, it is an extraordinarily good thing. But as we look at the values of working together, and we see that being transferred not only within a country, but internationally, the global level, that indeed it can be done. We know how challenging it is just to work at the local level. But to work now at the international level introduces new challenges. And for the people in the room who are speaking about this development, it's an historic development. It's an historic development of Indigenous peoples standing together to create a new way of doing film, a new way of shining a light on our cultures, our languages, and our histories. How mistake is Jiganitan in an now.
Thank you, everyone.